Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions. I'm Deborah Maldonado, and I'm here with Dr. Rob Maldonado.
Welcome back.
And this is a continuation of our series on personality. We talked about personality tests. We talked about trauma and how to overcome that and our specific opinions and theories on how to work with trauma. And then this episode, we're talking about why being a good person is making you miserable. And it may be shocking, but we're going to talk about the personality of a good person. What does that mean? And how can we really have freedom in our life over our behavior and stop feeling so judged and shamed in the world for doing something wrong and that kind of hyper-perfectionism that happens in the world. So before we really get into it, I think we should define what a personality is when we talk about personality.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Always define your terms, right?
Yes.
What is personality and what is ego?
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of different models of personality, of course, because there are different psychologies or different psychological models of what a personality is. So our model, or the model that we use in our coaching, is basically a Jungian model, which means it's a psychodynamic model. It's a model that is transpersonal, meaning that really the aim is to go beyond personality.
Not to build up the personality.
Yes, but of course, we need a personality. We need like Jung says, a persona in order to interact with the world, with the social world.
And a lot of people, I think that their personality is fixed. And in essence, if you haven't done individuation or shadow work, you pretty much are fixed, wouldn't you say, in personality? You're kind of you think you identify with yourself as you always have, and you perceive other people perceiving your personality that way?
Yeah.
Kind of upholding your reputation in a way?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the energy goes into creating this persona, propping it up, making sure people accept your persona and that it looks good, polishing it up, and also keeping the shadow away, which we'll be talking about a little bit.
So when you talk about the persona, when do you think, how young do you think we develop a persona, where we develop this personality? I mean, part of it is genetic as well. Don't we have this predisposition to be either hyper or introvert or extrovert or creative?
Yeah, one thing we know in psychology is it's never one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Everything seems to be multifactorial, meaning a lot of factors are contributing to one thing happening. So especially personality or persona, because if you think about how complex a human being is, we require years and years of education, of caring, of socialization in order to kind of get us up to speed to what the culture is, how we're going to interact, how we're going to survive in the world.
So would it be at birth that or even in utero, that our personality is starting to form? I mean, I know some pregnant women will have different children and the child acts differently in the womb than other children. So there's this sort of like the more relaxed child or the more anxious child.
Yeah. I was around premature babies and regular term babies through my work in the medical field. And I can tell you from day one, you get a sense that there's a personality already there.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely these predispositions, like you say, which are genetic, epigenetic, familial kind of inheritance. But then the environment plays a big role in what the person does with those inherited traits, how they're going to develop and how they're going to come forth or be repressed.
So for me, I was really outgoing when I was little, but then when I was outgoing with my family, but when I was around people, my mother said I would talk I don't know if you could imagine
Not
that.
you.
And but she would say, she said I was speaking full sentences when I was 8 months old. But then she was so proud of me, and then a stranger would come and she'd be like, Debbie, sing that song, you know, and I'd just be shut up. And then I kind of carried that into my social personality versus my internal people that knew me. And so it took a little time for me to come out of my shell. So that would be, so how would you, like, defining me as introverted isn't really true, because once you get to know me, I'm not. So we all have those type of, depending on who we're around, our personality can be different. As we all know, when we're around our parents, we're a different personality than when we're around our children or different relatives or friends. Or at work, right? We have this work persona. And so, so you would say right from the beginning it starts, and then where does the external or the environmental influence start to happen? Just right out of when the baby's born, right? How the parent holds the child and nurtures the child and
pretty much,
talks to the child.
Jung, I think, agreed with Freud in that the primary relationship with the mother is the really important one. Because from day one, then you get a sense of what kind of world am I being born into. If your mother's caring and attentive and nurturing, and you have that good connection with her, early on, you start to get a sense that it's a friendly world, it's a nurturing world, it's going to be fine. Whereas if you don't, or it's spotty, or there's kind of this ambiguity about whether your needs are being met or not, your physical, emotional needs, then people develop personalities that are insecure, let's say.
So when we talk about like goodness, we are taught from our parents, don't be a bad girl, don't be a bad boy, that was bad, that was good. So we start learning these morally objectionable behaviors right when we were young. Like we don't run around naked, we don't curse, we act polite around people. Most of us were told that eat like a human being, not like an animal at the table. There's a lot of like goodness and structure to basically helping your child grow up in the world and fit in.
Yeah. So from the Jungian perspective, then that socializing aspect of fitting in, of being part of the tribe, part of the community, is really important, because that's the function of the persona, is to give us an identity within the group. So we're unique, but we're still part of the group.
Do you think that if there's, like, I was very talkative and my sister was very quiet, do you think she was naturally quiet, or could it be because I was doing all the talking that she took on another role? Can that happen in families where the roles of personality are based on who took that job? Like, who's the clown of the family? Who's the serious one? Or do you think it's more like genetic and it just kind of happens? Or both? I guess you would say both, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways of looking at it, but certainly we know human beings, as human beings, we're storytellers. And so we have an internal story, a narrative, of self-narrative of what character are we playing and how is my life playing out. So if you're, the hero of your story, then you're doing pretty good, right? Because you feel yourself to be kind of guided by divine intuition or some force beyond your personality that helps you. If you feel yourself a victim, it's the opposite, right? Then you feel the whole world is out to get you. All you're doing is spending your time defending yourself, hiding as much as possible, protecting yourself from the dangers out there in the world.
So when we think about becoming a good person, that persona that's good, that's doing the right thing, everyone's like, I got to do the right thing. We could have that intention to be good, and then when we're let down, we tend to also rebel and push back, or be more we can be like the black sheep of the family, or be the rebel. If in school, like if the teacher never gives you that attention and you're trying to be good, and she's always just has a vendetta against you for some reason, so she's projecting something into you. you can actually change your personality to be more the troublemaker, right? Because you just, well, it doesn't help to be good, so we do the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a big debate, the nurture-nature debate that's been going on in psychology for a long time. Kind of the latest research shows that it's pretty much equal. The inherited traits contribute about 50% of the variance in your personality, and the environment the other 50. So it's always that brain environment interaction that's going on, and we're designed to adapt, to fit in, to find a way to relate to our environment and to make it work for us.
So, and everyone's unique. We can't say that everyone that has experienced this will turn out this way. It's everyone's experience and their genetics and their parents and their culture. So there's a lot going into it. So let me ask you this question. What made us, besides the social pressure of fitting in with the tribe, what makes us, from an ego's perspective, desire to be good? What is that? I guess religious influence, or is there something even more spiritual and our soul wants to have a good intention, or I don't know. What would you think?
Yes. So the Jungian model would say that the persona is the external face that we put for interacting in groups in society, but the ego is the internal self-awareness and self-concept of the I that is that internal reality that we construct within ourselves, and that's that internal narrative as well. So goodness, from that point of view, is anything that helps me, the ego, the I, survive, fit in, feel secure. Now, that works up to a certain point, Jung would say, because yes, it helps us survive and develop a viable persona for ourselves. But if you persist in that, then the ego is going to become essentially like a tyrant over your mind, because it's going to demand more and more.
So like a disciplinarian when you say tyrant, or
more in the sense that it is very self-centered, and in the beginning it works because you have to be self-centered. If you notice, as teenagers, it's all about me. What am I going to do? How do people see me? All that stuff. So that's the right approach early on. But he says, as you develop, like if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It goes from survival needs to social needs, but then to higher spiritual needs like self-actualization.
Even contributing to society in a more spiritual way, like a higher way, or
yes, well, what Jung would call transpersonal aspects of the psyche. And if you remain as persona, that is, if you persist in identifying as your ego persona, then all you can do is kind of build up better defense mechanisms, better I mechanisms, which is very what we call narcissism, very self-centered, very focused on the I, even though the person may have good tendencies and want to express those good tendencies. It always is about augmenting and amplifying the I.
Yeah. So when you say that people don't, if they don't transcend the ego, what really makes them miserable is because this persona has this desire to be good, and so everything that's morally objectionable goes in the shadow, depending on their own unique subjective decision, and then how the ego regulates that, I find, is through guilt and shame. And so if we do something bad, we tend to feel shame or guilt around it. And then also when we perceive someone else hurting us or harming us, the defense mechanism of the ego is, ooh, you did something bad to me. I want to shame you now. I want to make you feel guilty or something. So it's like that mechanism, it works internally, but it also projects externally.
Yeah. So if you notice those emotions and even the social pressure to conform and to kind of fall in line, there's nothing wrong with that. It works as a way of helping the individual fit in and making sure that the group survives, because the individual is contributing to the group and kind of going along with the group. But Jung says that level of existence is kind of a very primitive, preliminary stage of your individual development, what he called individuation. Because if we're all only conforming, only looking out for ourselves, and not really being able to make choices beyond that, then we're not really acting out of free will. We're acting out of conditioning, out of the group's needs, and out of that need to conform to society. So it's a limited ego reality that we experience when we're caught in the persona.
Yeah, a really simple example of this, we all have experienced this, but have you ever sent an email to someone and they got triggered because they misread what you wrote, or they, emphasized one word with the other because they're reading it from their own perspective, and then they yell back at you, and then you feel kind of guilty, and then you kind of, well, I know you probably don't do this, but I know there's a lot of us obsess over, oh no, I can't believe I hurt that person's feelings, and you try to, resolve that situation because it's a defense. Like, I want to not feel guilty. I have to resolve this. So that can make us really miserable, because we could spend sleepless nights worried about what we said, what they think about us, what they're going to tell other people, that who we are, that kind of obsession. Yeah. We've all experienced it one way or another. Maybe not you, Rob. I don't know.
I started out like everyone else.
I started out like everyone else.
You start confused and projecting and trying to fit in and finding ways to adapt. That's just a natural way of existing.
Another thing too, when I worked with single people, a lot of them didn't want to date because they said, I don't want to have to say no to someone that I'm not interested in, because I don't want to be a bad person. So even then, it doesn't give them any freedom, because they don't have the freedom to say, sorry, this isn't a fit. They feel like, I'm going to hurt this person terribly. Dating is painful. And it was painful I said, well, if it's painful for you when someone breaks up with you or is not interested in you, you're going to project that onto the person. So the best thing we can do is really work with our own mind and our own projections, so we can be free, and in that way we free other people too, because you're not really connecting or really having intimate relationships if you're always worried that you're going to upset the apple cart, someone's going to get mad at you, walking on eggshells.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say Jung would see it this way, that if we persist as with this over-identification as persona, which is okay in the beginning, or let's say early adulthood, up until 25, 35, between that age, if we don't find a way to transcend, to go beyond our persona ego, then we get stuck. Essentially, the mind starts to turn against us because we're not really employing its creative ability to its full extent.
So all that energy is just going to destruction versus creating something new.
Yes, and that's when people start to get into addiction, get into obsessive compulsive disorders or behaviors, because all that creative energy is not really flowing. We're not expressing the full potential of the psyche, and we're trying to constrain it to make it very small to fit into the persona ego structure.
Sometimes I see a lot of people that have that kind of I can't be bad, and they almost the extreme. This is very rare, but I see this show up where they make everyone else bad. It's like everything's bad and everyone's bad because they can't be bad, and I'm good and everyone else is bad, and that's another defense, and that actually creates a lack of intimacy with other people, because you're not going to trust anyone to get close to you if you're always thinking the world is so terrible.
Yeah.
Or people are so terrible.
Yeah, so that's what Jung calls the shadow, essentially, that whatever you find morally objectionable, you have to repress in yourself and deny in yourself and project it outward. That you see it in other people and it irritates you, it triggers you. You feel morally outraged at other people, but it's within you.
Like you're really outraged at yourself in a way?
In a way, you are defending against those elements in your own psyche.
And in a way, we kind of know we can be like that, but we are trying to fool ourselves, like almost like when we know one day we're going to die, like all of us have experienced other people dying in our life, but we shut it out in our brain that no, it's not going to happen to me, I'm going to live forever. So we kind of do that with the shadow elements. We know, like, we can tend to be that way, but we just don't and for most people, they don't even realize it, but it's still kind of there. Like, you kind of feel like, oh yeah, I know I have that capability of having a little bit of that, but I'm denying that. I don't want to look at it. That's
the hard part about the shadow. Jung says it because it requires great moral courage. So what does that mean? And that's a direct quote, right? That facing your shadow requires great moral courage. What is he implying there? He's implying that it's going to require you to really grit your teeth and say, yes, that's part of me as well. What I'm seeing in others as terrible, I'm capable of that.
Oh, I'm judging myself, and I would judge myself. Is it more about judgment than actually you being that?
Well, I would say the ego is definitely judging that as bad, because it's not that that the ego is doing anything wrong or evil. Like a lot of people blame the ego and make the ego something terrible. It's simply doing its job. Yeah. It's doing its function of making sure you're able to fit into the world. Especially when you're a kid, you're not able to reason and rationalize about morality. So instinctually, it helps you understand, oh, this is the way people behave. I have to fit in this way. And if there are tendencies in me that don't fit in and don't help me fit in, I have to repress them. I have to hide them and deny them in a sense. But they don't go anywhere. They simply go into your shadow.
And wouldn't you say that ultimately, if we look at goodness and badness, if you put all those traits in your own personal category, we're not really either of those things, because they're really just words. They're labels. They're very light. They don't have any solid objective meaning to them. And we live as though bad is this terrible, like, solid thing that we have to wear like a badge over our chest or our forehead for the rest of our life, or and even someone not liking us, like we're unliked or unloved. So the shadow work and individuation is really so we're not so attached to the persona being good, and we're not so scared of what we perceive as being bad, and then we're able to merge them together and then make a decision outside of those two things. It's outside of our conditioning. That's what's propped us up, and then and what we push away, and really say, well, if I didn't have to be good and I didn't have to be bad, how would I act? How can I be free and make a free choice? Yeah. Would we freely give because we want to, or are we giving because everyone expects us to?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and here you see that Jung is essentially developing a spiritual psychology. Spiritual but not religious. Because he would say, well, religion is essentially coming from the outside, because it's a moral code that's handed down to you by culture, and it says, here are the commandments, right? Here's what you should and shouldn't do. And that's external. That's not coming from within you. He says individuation means you have to find that within yourself. What is morally good in you, or how can you define that goodness within you, your own psyche, within your own understanding, so that you're expressing that spirituality from within, not borrowing it from the culture and saying, well, if I follow these commandments, that means I'm spiritual or good.
If I'm not if I give and don't eat meat and be kind to others. And when I'm unkind, that means it's bad karma. Like that bad karma is going to come around. When we talk about karma, the only persons there's no outside force that's saying this is good, this is bad. You're your own judge and jury. You're the one who says you're gonna. If you don't feel guilt around something, if you don't feel bad about being successful or being asking for what you want, you're not going to. It's not going to have that emotional trigger. Then if you do, it's in your shadow and like you feel guilt and conflicted about it.
Yeah, and so in spiritual traditions, almost all spiritual mystical traditions say this, that it's not about morality. Now, morality...
That's scary, right? We get that question a lot.
Yeah, it's important in the beginning, of course, because let's say in order to cultivate and develop yourself, you need some structure, some guidance. You need to be...
The basic rules of living.
Yeah, you can't be breaking the laws or getting into trouble all the time, because that won't allow for a peaceful mind that is able to focus on higher knowledge. But it says once you start to get into that spiritual practice, you realize that external moral code is a good start, but you have to get to the point where you don't need it anymore.
Is it like the 8 limbs of yoga, that right action, right words? Those in Buddhism, they talk about that.
Patanjali, the Yoga Sutras, the Buddhist,
the 10 Commandments in Christianity. Yeah.
All of them would agree essentially that a moral code is important for beginners, right? To get on the path.
And so individuation doesn't mean we throw out the moral code and we start killing people and acting reckless and intending harm on others.
Exactly, because you need to get on that path of righteousness, in a sense of you're intending to do good, and you start with whatever's available to you, and often those codes are available to us through culture, through religion, through our parents or our teachers somehow, and they help us get on that right path. But if you stop there, let's say if you only say, well, I have the moral code and therefore that's good enough for me, that's not real spirituality. That's religion. Following
the rules.
Yes.
It's not really, you're not choosing it. You're just kind of conforming.
You're conforming, yes, that's right. And it might keep you on the straight and narrow, but psychologically, and this is where Jung psychology is transpersonal, meaning that spirituality is about transcending your ego. Not about making it better, not about it making it appear good to others.
Like the spiritual bypassing, like I'm so peaceful and loving and kind, and then they're inside raging posts, and going crazy on social media, and it's like, wait a minute, are you the same person that is speaking peace and love? So it's, and not just the spiritual people, all spiritual people sometimes can get into that, where they deny their own humanity. And so when we talk about that, like the good and bad, staying in the moral and not, if we're in conditioning, it's literally, when you say it's impossible to follow those moral codes all the time, because we're conditioned to be human and make mistakes, and we're flawed, and the ego's flawed in that way. So we're always going to trip up on ourselves and say the wrong things to people, and people are going to say the wrong things to us. And to understand what that means is it doesn't make you a bad person or them a bad person. It's like having that higher understanding.
Yeah, if you stay in with a moral code, let's say, and you're still in persona, what's going to happen is you're going to build up a huge shadow, because the more good you present yourself to be to the world and to your self-narrative, your I narrative, the more the shadow is going to be growing in energy and kind of, it's going It's going to take its revenge on you, essentially, sooner or later. So you see people that are big preachers or big moralists kind of preaching out there to wipe out a certain evil or especially people that point fingers at other groups. They say, those people we should be,
get rid of them or ship them out of the country.
Exactly. That's ego. I mean, that's shadow projection right there. Very caught up in the shadow. And eventually then the shadow overwhelms them and it makes them trip up. It makes them fall from grace.
But just even in general, we have to have compassion for each other because even not everyone's going to do shadow work, and so people are going to act out of alignment with where your subjective moral needs are and moral code is. And someone asking you, like, some people think, it's rude to ask how much money you make or how much, how long have you been married, or do you want children? Like these kind of questions where someone else would be like, she's such a nosy person or a bad person for asking me that. But people are just acting out of their own conditioning. I mean, that's a kind of a simple example, but even like people that steal or do really terrible, things, it's not that they're intending to be bad. It's more the conditioning has led them to act out in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you definitely a different perspective on things. And this is, again, why it requires great moral courage. Because real compassion is not saying, well, I know you did wrong or you did wrong to me, therefore I forgive you. That's still kind of an ego, right? You're still identifying as persona ego and saying your persona did something against me or bad to me, and therefore I have to forgive you. And that makes me a better person.
I'm a good person, you harm me, and I'm going to forgive you.
Yes.
Because I'm a good person and I'm spiritual and I'm going to forgive you. I'm evolved and I have a higher consciousness than you, and it's less about that because that still has a judgment to it.
Still very much in kind of social judgment level. Real real compassion, really, the psychological mechanism of real compassion is to understand that we're not, when we're caught up in persona ego, when we're acting out of our own karma, out of conditioning, we're not responsible. In other words, if my parent or somebody in my past experience harmed me, if I understand their true motivation was out of conditioning, out of their karma, I don't blame them in particular. I can see that they were caught up. They're caught up just like I was caught up in that experience of conditioning, of karma, of expressing that frustration or the anger, whatever is going on with them. And that absolves them really of their sin, essentially.
Almost like you have compassion, you're cultivating compassion for your own self to be free of the anger or the resentment toward that person. But then you're also freeing them. It's like you're working on your own self-compassion for when you make a mistake. I remember one time I felt really guilty about an exchange I had with someone, and I talked to you about it, and I'm like, I should have said this, me and my obsession. I should have said this. I shouldn't have said that. I'm a good person would have done differently. And you said to me, Debbie, you acted exactly as you needed to because it gave you such a lesson in just something you needed to see. And it just freed all of that pressure. When you told me that, I said, this happened like 10 years ago. I remember thinking like a load had been lifted off of me, because when we do something or someone accuses us of being a bad person, we tend to want to fight it. Like you could feel your ego trying to defend it, and then beating, and then even self-punishment and regret. And we could spend our whole life in regret, and it's just a terrible state in your mind to be in. And so when I was able to say, okay, well, this really got me to a point to see a part of my shadow. I free her from, her judgment or whatever she was going through. I understand she was acting out of conditioning, and then I'm free, they're free. And it's just a better way to do it than the old way, which is put them in the stockade in the center of a town, throw food at them, punish them publicly in some way. Or even now they talk about the social media being the kind of town hall of shame for everyone who does something bad. God forbid you do something and then it gets viral on the internet. So it's like, how can we create a more compassionate culture is if we let go of this idea that we always have to be such a good person. It sounds so weird, right? That we shouldn't want to have to be a good person. We should cultivate the desire to always do no harm, but not be attached to our personality being seen and known as good. Would that be a good way to think about it?
Yeah. The great philosopher Lao Tse, the Tao Te Ching says, when you define goodness, you're defining badness. You're giving birth to badness already, because you're creating that split. You're saying this behavior is good. Therefore, even if you don't mention the bad, just by defining something as good, you're implying that there is a badness already. There's
the two sides of the coin.
Yes. And so that dual nature of our existence is always playing out. And Jung is simply pointing out that if you're not aware of that duality, then you're going to be blindsided by the opposite side of the coin, right? The shadow.
I always find that the more attached you are to being a certain way, there's always some little trickster that's going to come out and go, oh, you think you're so good? Well, I'm going to just, and they're going to really get you. And so if you don't work with it on the small level, it's going to keep building up, and then it's going to have a bigger impact. And karma is really not an external judgment. It's really what you put out, you get back. And so it's really what you're seeing is your own mind, not what society believes about you is really what you believe about you. What your own perception of yourself in the world, and this as an object in the world, is going to be defined by what you decide, not by the world. And that's another great quote by Jung is, the world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you. And this is that good person, that attachment to, I need the world to see me a certain way. It's like, no, you bring what you want to be in the world, and out of your choice, but you have to do your shadow work or you are not in control.
Yeah. So personality, we see it as highly complex, a lot of different angles to it, a lot of different factors that play into it. But we need a model like Jung's that it's broad enough, it's comprehensive enough to give us an understanding of why we're choosing goodness in a social context, and what are the things that we're pushing away, so that we can be aware of the shadows that we're creating.
So I guess one last exercise you can think about is think about someone that you judge harshly in the world as being bad, and that's your shadow. Well, meet your shadow, and then really, it's not that you are like them, but there's something in you that's pushing that away, and then examine, like, what is that? Why does that person trigger me? Why is that keeping me safe by making that person wrong? And what do I do? How do I define myself in comparison to that person? What are the two sides of the coin? I like to use the two sides of the coin. It makes it really easy. Like, oh, they're a taker and I'm a giver. What is about that person that gets under my skin, or a type of person? And you're really starting to see that they're your best friend because they're showing you something that you can't see directly. It's the mirror reflection in the hologram of the world.
That's a good way to put it, yes.
So next week, we are going to talk about becoming your true personality. So we'll talk a little bit about the whole individuation process when it comes to transforming your personality. This was a really great talk today. I really enjoyed talking about being good and being bad. So we'll see you next week on another episode of Creative Mind Soul Sessions. And please, if you haven't, subscribe below on our YouTube channel. If you're listening to our podcast, please make sure you leave us an honest review. We love those reviews. It gets people motivated to listen and get this great content. So we will see you next week. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for watching.
Take care. Bye-bye.